I'm Rachel Wilson here with U Media Chicago, and we're very excited to have a visit with Varian Johnson today. Varian is the author of 10 books for young people, including The Parker Inheritance, which made our Best of the Best list in 2018, and it was named a 2019 Coretta Scott King Honor Book and a 2018 Boston Globe Horn Book Award Honor Book. I also want to give a shout out to his middle grade caper novel, The Great Green Heist, and its sequel. Varian lives in Austin, Texas, and he serves on the faculty of the Vermont College of Fine Arts in their MFA program in writing for children and young adults. And that's actually where we met because we were students in the same class. Yep. So I'm very excited to talk with you today, Varian. How are you?
I'm good, Rachel. I am very excited to talk to you, as always.
I was hoping you could kick things off by telling us just a little bit about how you got into writing. What initially made you catch that bug?
I always liked writing. I was a reader first, and I grew up reading Beverly Cleary, Judy Blume. But then when I discovered Walter D. Myers, that's when things really started to change, and I started thinking, well, maybe I could be a writer too. Now, that being said, I loved engineering as well too. I was a practicing engineer for a lot of years. So I actually went to college for engineering, and then worked as a civil engineer while still kind of loving writing and doing writing on the side. And then for a long time, I published books and I designed bridges simultaneously. But now I get to do it, full time, mostly with other stuff.
Yeah. Well, how was that for you when you decided you wanted to make the switch from being a bridge building engineer to writing children's books? How did your family and support system take that?
They were it took a little convincing, I think. Uh my folks loved it. They love that I'm a writer. They love it. But they loved that I was an engineer too. And there's something about the stability of engineering, of a steady 9-to-5 job, which is really nice, especially in turbulent times. And I respect everyone's opinion, but also sometimes you gotta just do what you gotta do. I will say I felt like I was pretty smart about it. I saved money. I didn't quit initially. I published, it was right before 2017, right before The Parker Inheritance was published, that I left the full-time job. So I had been publishing for 12 years at that point.
Wow.
And I had a backlist set up, and I knew I had other books under contract. So I felt pretty good about it, but also I still keep up my engineering license. So theoretically, I could go back. I might be kind of useless, but I could theoretically go back to it if I had to.
That's cool. That's like a secret skill that I didn't know you had.
Yeah.
Are you, so we have some questions that people have been putting up for us, and I want to invite people to leave questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. So one question that came in was from Christina L. And Christina wanted to know, what do you do to counter writer's block?
Christina L, I hope you're a writer. I think writer's block means a lot of different things. I think sometimes I'm blocked because I'm just lazy and I don't want to write. And I think that's okay too. So you take a step away, you watch some YouTube, you take a walk, you read a great book. I think that's all great, all fine. But then at the end of the day, you actually do have to write, and you have to figure out why you're stuck. And I find I'm stuck for usually 2 or 3 different reasons. One, I'm not interested in the project I'm working on anymore. And then I had to figure out how to get back interested, or I put it aside. Sometimes some projects aren't really meant to be, and that's okay. Or you have to come back to them later on. Other times I'm stuck because I've worked myself into a corner, and I don't know what the character should do next. So then I have to back up and change things in the story, or change things in the character to get them to go a different way or to react a different way. I mean, people say that they let the characters do the walking and talking and they just follow. That's all well and good, but I kind of like to think of myself in kind of God mode when I'm writing, that I ultimately have control. So I can change them up. And then lastly, I get stuck when I am dreading doing a scene because I think it might be boring or uninteresting, or I have to slog through to get to the good stuff. And what I found is I just skip it and I go to the part I like. And if I need to, I'll come back and fill it in. More times than not, I could find a way to easily transition between the good part and the good part, a paragraph transition between that in that boring part, and then it's all good. It's all gold again. So
Like go to the thing you're excited about and then pour
exactly.
your energy there, and
Yeah.
then eventually the rest will come in.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned, Beverly Cleary and
Mhm.
Judy Blume and some of those authors, and your early novels were all from a female perspective. Would you be up for speaking a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It felt natural. I think it felt those were the stories I wanted to tell. Um, I don't know, and I don't know if I would do. I mean, I, I. Whew, you get tricky, right? When you talk about what an author can or cannot do, and
Yeah,
I'm never here to say what an author can or cannot do or what they can or cannot write. If they should write it, should be another question. For instance, when I wrote "My Life as a Rhombus," which came out 12 years ago, um, when I wrote that book, it dealt a lot with teenage pregnancy, and I did a lot of research, talking to not only reading essays, talking to women who had been in that situation, who had been teenage moms, and what choices they made. Also talking to a lot of clinics as well too. So I did a lot of research for the book, and I feel really good about that book even now. But I will say now in 2020, would I write that book? I think the answer would be maybe not, maybe no. Maybe I would say, hey, I think someone else can do this topic justice. And it doesn't mean that what I'm writing is bad. It just may mean that someone else may be able to do it better and perhaps even more authentically.
sure. That kind of speaks to the own voices hashtag that I believe Christine Dalvis coined
I
that,
believe
and
so. Yeah.
it it kind of speaks to the idea of supporting authors who write from authentic experience.
Yeah.
Um, I know my students are always wanting permission, but I really like what you said. It's like no one else can give you that
Yeah.
permission.
Yeah. I find usually when someone is emailing me asking me about a project or asking me something, they're not asking, they ask for my permission. And I'm like, I can't give you that. I mean, I will never tell another author what they can or cannot write. But all of us, all authors, when we put our work out into the world, we're open to criticism. Whether that criticism is right or wrong, good or bad, valid or not, um, the text gets to be criticized. And we have to live with that. And if we're not up for the criticism about a book, not necessarily about you as a person, as an author, that's a little different.
Mhm.
But about a book, then we shouldn't be writing that book.
I hear that. Um, well, so I want to talk about your upcoming book. You
Sure.
have a graphic novel, and I believe this is your first graphic novel,
Yeah.
titled Twins, that's
Yep.
coming out in October. And I
Yes.
see the cover back there. I wonder if
Yeah.
you mind showing us the the cover in the camera so we can get a good
I've
look.
heard actually some people in Chicago supposedly have a actual copy of the book.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
yet.
I don't have it.
I don't either. So this is the advanced reading copy where some of the pages are in color.
Okay, cool.
But it's nice because Shannon Wright is the wonderful illustrator for the book, and a lot of the pages are in the inks, just black and white pages, and in some of them we even see some of the pencils. Hold on, I gotta find to a page that doesn't spoil it. Hold on,
So
no,
this copy's not completely colored the way it will be when it comes out.
that's correct. Yep, it'll be full color when it comes out, but not yet. Not in the advanced reading copy because it was completed so early, a year plus before the book came out. Oops,
Okay, great. I would love to know. You got
I'm
it.
picking up. I'm picking up. I gotta hold on to these bad boys until
Down.
the book comes. All I got. All right, what's up?
Could you give us just a little synopsis of what that book's about, who it's for,
Sure.
what inspired that book?
Oh, good questions. Okay, the book is about twins, right? Twin sisters Maureen and Francine are starting middle school, and Maureen is the more introverted of the two. She is really not looking forward to it. Her and her sister Francine are placed in separate classes for the first time. Francine, on the other hand, is gung ho. She's excited. She is ready to kick things off. Um, Francine ends up deciding she wants to run for student class president. Maureen isn't going to, then she gets goaded into it. Then she gets upset because her sister they have disagreements about things. So they end up running against each other. Both of them running for sixth grade class president, and then that's when the fun really being in a family, being a part of a unit while also figuring out who you are as your own unique individual self. But it's also about um, Black love and Black joy too. I really wanted an illustrator, a co-creator who was Black, who was a woman, who could really relate to the girls as much or even more so than I could, um, and who could show the girls and all their hair and all their styles and what they do and how they talk and all of that to really just showcase the uniqueness, um, the uniqueness with also the commonality of being a Black girl, because Black girls are just like girls and anywhere else. I hate that sometimes we feel like they have to be othered. You know,
Mhm.
they get to have their own dreams and wants and rights too, right? So I hope it's for everybody. I think folks will love it. I think certainly if folks love graphic novels, we think they should pick this up. I think if you are breathing, you should read it. I think that's
Good
kind of,
answer.
yeah, that's my answer on that.
Good answer. I'm curious, so what was that process like of working with an illustrator for the first time?
Um, uh, Great, but hard. I think you know, when writing a novel, you're doing it by yourself, and very rarely will I show a partial draft to anyone, even my editor or my critique group. Sometimes, usually, the whole thing is there before I'm sending it in and I want big feedback on the whole arc. Here, Shannon saw bits and pieces of it along, and she saw the final thing at the end too. And so it's interesting having another voice kind of coming in, but also it's great having another voice because she had these great insights about the book, about places where the the characterization or the story beats maybe felt off, where we can straighten or tighten things. Also, places where the art can do more of the heavy lifting than the writing. There were some scenes, one and two in particular, that were probably overwritten, and it was a learning lesson for me to like step back and trust my partner, trust that she can get across this emotion, this feeling in the art without me having to try to dialogue or caption it to death. So that was good. It was hard at first, but now it's a better product because of that for sure.
Yeah. We probably I know there are a lot of teens at my branch who are interested in writing graphic novels.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice for like what kind of story lends itself to being a graphic novel versus a traditional prose novel?
Sure, sure. I used to think you had to have really big, flashy things or flashy moments for it to be
Hmm.
a graphic novel. I don't know if I believe that anymore. I think certainly it needs to be something that lends itself to being illustrated. And I think you have to think about length a little bit. I think a 600-page novel that is hard to turn into graphic novel form with all of those beats. You have to figure out what to cut. Um, I think certainly you want something where there's changes of scenery and action happening. Something where everything happens in one house, in one room, even like that's kind of tough for a graphic novel. Um, but where you're changing scenery or where the characters have lots of different looks, perspectives, I think that's really, really beneficial. This is great. Yeah, I have it here. This great book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. I really
Oh, great.
encourage anybody who wants to try out graphic novels to read it. A lot of great information in here. And of course, it's helpful just to read lots of different graphic novels as well, too, and lots of different types, YA to middle grade to adult to even early reader, small trim size, big trim size, um, and then kind of just see how the process goes. You never know till you try it. And some things, sometimes I started graphic novels and I realized, oh, yep, nope, this is not going to work as a graphic novel.
Mhm.
And I start books where I think, oh no, actually, I think I'm gonna kind of put this to the side and save it as a graphic novel. So yeah,
Um, it sounds like, I mean, I know that revision is a huge part of the writing process, but it sounds like you've made some bold choices about, is this the right medium for this book? Is this the right audience for this book? I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. Like, how deep into the process are you when you realize that you need to make a dramatic shift or change things up?
It depends. I mean, I've never gotten to the point where I've written a whole full thing of something and then realized, oh no, I need to change the format. Um, I have gotten through a majority of something and realized, oh no, I need to change the point of view. Instead of first person to third person, or it needs to be partially historical instead of contemporary. With the Park
Mhm.
Inheritance, for sure, that went back and forth a lot. Um, with one, well, I think every one of my YA novels, they started off differently with a different POV, and I changed it throughout, or a different main character even throughout.
Mhm.
Um, so I never made it through a full novel, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised if that ever happened, because at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for the book. And
Mhm.
sometimes a book is better if it's in a different format or a different genre or a different point of view or a different whatever. And it sucks, right? It takes a lot longer. It takes a lot longer to get it done. But at the end of the day, you want your, if my name's on something, I want it to be the best book that I can make it to be.
Yeah.
And that takes time sometimes.
We have a question from a listener, and I want to touch on it. So it's from Romy Natalia G.
Okay.
Asks, what do you generally start with when prepping for a new story? Do you develop the character or the plot first, or does that change?
It, it's tricky. It depends. I think it changes for every book. I think I almost always have an idea first, but then like character and plot come really, really quickly afterwards, um, and then theme works its way in there, but much later, as I'm writing it, as I'm thinking about what I want to talk about. Um, but like, but like, let's take the Parker Inheritance, right? The Parker
Mhm.
Inheritance, I had this idea about. I had a bunch of different ideas, but I had this idea for a puzzle mystery first. Um, And after that, I started thinking about the characters, and they kept changing as I'm holding on to this idea of a puzzle mystery. And it wasn't until I had the puzzle mystery plus the idea of kind of going back in the past and following a family through 100 years or so as they deal with racism and slavery, Jim Crow,
Mhm.
um, that the characters really locked into place. Um, and even then, that plot was wishy-washy, but the idea was still there. So I guess I always had this idea of something first. With the Great Green Heist, oh, what if we had Ocean's 11, but like in middle school, right? And then it morphs from there. But
Yeah.
every book's not like that. Um, eh, some have been quite different, but for the most part, it's that nugget of an idea first, and then other things come about.
Did you do a lot of research for the Parker Inheritance?
Yeah, I did a bunch. I certainly did a lot of research online. I went back home. I'm from South Carolina. I
Mhm.
went back to my hometown and I interviewed a number of people who had gone to. I went to a high school called Wilson High School, which was founded in the 1800s, right at the turn of slavery. It's part of the Freedmen's Bureau, and it had been the black school up until integration and past that. So I wanted to talk to people who had been, graduated in the late 1950s to see what it was like, because that's how part of Parker was set during that time. And I learned a lot of things. Like I assumed that in 1957, 1958, 1960 even, that white kids were attending the school because Brown versus Board of Education had been passed in 1954. So integration was legal, segregation had been struck down. And everyone I talked to was like, no, we didn't have white kids at our school. And then I realized, oh, in my hometown, it took creating a whole new school to kind of get integration going, because people were still fighting against it. And I never knew that. I just never imagined that integration would take so long. And I did more research, hearing about other cities like Boston, where it just drug on forever.
Mhm.
The idea of integration, and that was really surprising and sad, but surprising.
That's what I was going to ask next, was like, what did you find anything that kind of took you by surprise? And that
Uh,
sounds like.
that was also, I think, I was really surprised with integration was necessary and we needed it. But there were some negative aspects to it too. I think oftentimes when schools were integrated, white teachers would come into black schools, but those white schools wouldn't necessarily hire those black teachers. So teachers who have been part of the community now found themselves out of a job. And I think
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. There's so much pride around schools sometimes. I think certainly for a lot of people, a lot of families who aren't going off to college, high school is your college, right? It's a big deal. For my high school, we have a homecoming every year. It's a huge deal. If you, even if it doesn't matter if you went to the school or not, you know, for a lot of time, if you're black, that was your school. You celebrated it because it represented yourself and your culture and all the things you can do. And some of that was lost, at least in bits and pieces, certainly when integration began, as the cultural identity of a school began to shift.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was necessary for integration. That
Mm-hmm.
that was ultimately required and necessary. So
Mm-hmm. I know that your most recent book was actually nonfiction
mhm,
about the Negro Leagues.
yes.
And I'm curious, did doing the research for the Parker Inheritance lead you toward that? Or was that a separate
It was all,
consideration?
you know what? It's kind of serendipitous. It was all tied together. I talk about a Negro League player very briefly in the Parker Inheritance. Um, Meanwhile, on an entirely different kind of thread or line of thinking, I had been contacted about doing a book about Negro League baseball. And I knew the editor and I loved the idea of it. I love Negro League baseball. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And that actually sparked some other ideas as well, too. Um, I knew a lot about Negro League baseball, certainly about players like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, but there are all these other great heroes as well, too. I guess I'm amazed about how much I didn't know about the subject, but I'm grateful to have learned so much about it, too.
Yeah, that's cool. I like the idea that a book could be an excuse to learn something that
Yeah.
you're curious about or didn't know. We have another question I want to address. It's from Amy D, and Amy wants to know: is it hard to keep track of all the characters' plot lines when you have a big group of characters, like in The Great Green Heist? And Amy says she loves that book, which I do too.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
so I wonder, we talked a little bit about point of view. What's it like to juggle multiple points of view that way?
Yeah. I use Scrivener to write. And I know you use Scrivener as well too. And I really like it because I can break things down by chapter or by scene. And I found myself color coding when characters were kind of the POV characters in the book.
Mhm.
But I also kind of made a list of all the characters when they were in a scene, when they were talking, when they were point of view characters, so I could keep track of it. It was really a suggestion by my editor for that book, Cheryl Klein. She had me basically do an outline after the fact. And after I did the outline, I could see, oh, well, hey, we have this character here who talks in chapter 1, and we don't see them again until chapter 7. Maybe that's a problem.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of it was cutting down the characters to the ones we absolutely needed, and then placing it so that the characters are uniform when we see them. So if they're mentioned, that's one thing to be mentioned and in the background, but then when they really come onto the scene in the book, that they're there consistently throughout. Um, yeah, it's a lot of notes. I took lots of notes and took lots of color coding to try to keep it straight. And even then, I was off sometimes. That's what
Yeah.
revision is for, though.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wonder if you would speak to that process a little bit, because I know you've worked with the same editors, often multiple times, and
Yeah.
I'm sure they're all a little different, but like, what is that process like for you as a writer with getting feedback from your editor and then making adjustments based on that?
It's exhilarating and terrifying.
Mhm.
It's great to get that letter, and then there's kind of dread in it because they're going to say things you have to fix. It always feels like there's a little bit of stuff that's good and all the stuff that's bad, and it's not always like that. But certainly, um, everyone's job is to make the book the best book that it can be. So there are things that need to be revisited. So I read the letter, I put it aside, and then I come back to it in a day or two. I kind of respond back, and then sometimes we'll have a conversation. Um, honestly, in the letters I get, 75% of the stuff is things I knew. I was just kind of hoping I could get away with it because I'm lazy, right?
Aren't
um,
we all?
yes. And the 25% of the things that really make sense. I will say I have a bad habit of cramming a lot of themes, thoughts, things I want to discuss in a book. And my editors have been like, that's great, but you could also say this for another book, right?
Mhm.
It's a balance between having a three-dimensional character who is nuanced and who has thoughts on lots of different things versus a character who is thinking about everything in every possible scenario all the time while trying to show nuance with everything all the time. And all that's happening and nothing's happening in the book because they're thinking and talking all the time. Um, it's a balance.
Yeah.
That's probably what I have a big, huge problem with.
Well, that's what editors are for,
That's
right?
correct.
Um, I wanted to talk a little bit. We're kind of nearing
Oh,
4:30, but I wanted to ask you about community because I feel like of the authors I know, you are one of the most social, extroverted authors. And um, Varian will ask a writing friend, "What's your deadline?" and then put it in his own personal calendar to remind people of when they said they would be wanted to be held accountable. So, like, what has being part of the writing community meant for your writing life?
it's everything, and you know this, right? I think it is hard to be a writer. It is hard to do anything where you are alone and you're putting something out there in the world, and so much of it is based on what other people think about it. Um, Certainly, you write your own thing, you think it's good, but like it's tough. The rejection and the reviews, and just the idea of being in this bubble, spending all this time, years sometimes working on something, and then it going out into the world, and whatever happens, happens. So I think it's really great to have people to be with you on that journey who understand it and who can cheer you on along the way and who can comfort you when things aren't good because there's going to be highs and lows, good and bad. And I know we need that in everything. I mean, I don't see it any different than any other job, but my engineering job was very different. Like I knew when I designed something well because someone checked in those well and then those built and like it's not falling down. Like, oh yeah, I did a good job, right? And I got paid pretty well to do it. This is a little different. So I think it's important to have that community. I think it's important to always have people around you supporting you and cheering you on because sometimes you're going to lose faith in yourself and you need those people to remind you that, hey, you're good at this thing.
Hmm. Absolutely. Um, what advice would you give to a teen writer who's wanting to build some kind of community around writing?
Yeah. I would say it's hard to write every day. I don't put that burden on yourself, but try to set to a schedule. Maybe write 2 or 3 times a week. Set your timer on your phone for 15, 20 minutes and write. And it doesn't have to be something you show to anyone else. It doesn't have to be 100% correct. Just get it down, and that adds up over time. You can come back and revise it later on. You can fix it later on.
Hmm.
For me, the hardest thing is getting it down on the page in the first time. But also read a bunch. Read as much as you can. I think I would say about a topic or technique. So take those things and incorporate them into your own writing. But also just have fun. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You got plenty of time. You got the rest of your life to work on that book or two or three or 10 or whatever. So enjoy your life and live it too.
Yeah, I love that. Um, well, I think I would love to ask you before we sign off.
Mhm.
Um, is there any, upcoming book, either a project that you're working on or something that you've read that you're excited about that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Sure. Um, oh yeah. I'm excited about Twins, right? It comes out
Yeah,
in
of course.
October.
Yes.
Very excited about that. I
Everyone who
actually
breathes is reading Twins. So
say that again.
everyone who can breathe is reading Twins.
Yes, everyone who can breathe, you should be reading Twins. um, I have some other projects I'm working on, but I actually can't technically talk about them yet. Although I'll tell you after. Um, um, and what have I read? I don't know. There's a lot of good books that I have not read that I'm excited about. Um, I'm excited about Jerry Craft's second act, the sequel to New Kid, that's coming out in a couple of months. I haven't read Brandy Colbert's The Voting Booth yet, but I'm really excited about that book.
Me too.
Um, there was one on my list too. I was trying to get a copy of Three Keys. Um, Three Keys by Kelly Yang, the sequel to Front Desk, is coming out really soon. I'm really, really excited about that one as well too. And I keep hearing that there's going to be some more books. I thought there was going to be some more books about John Lewis. I don't know if that's going to happen since he passed away, but I loved March book 3. Great YA book about John Lewis's life. And I'm hopeful that there will be some additional books about his life after the 1960s as well, because he just led a remarkable, fascinating life.
Yeah.
Also, read March book 3 if you haven't read it yet. It's a great book.
Yes. That's a great rec. All of those. Varian, thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. Happy reading, guys. Happy reading to all you guys out there.
All right. Thank you so much. And please check back with us next week for another Speak On It author chat.